On my previous devlog, I finally got the core logic of my factory game working, the first real step towards releasing it on Steam. I made a lot of progress laying the foundation, but if I actually want this game to be worth publishing and paying that $100 Steam fee, it can't just work, it also needs to look like a real game. So in this devlog, I'll show you how I took my ugly game prototype and transformed it into a way better looking game. The first challenge I'm facing is coming up with good designs for the machines. And it's crucial not just because it will make the modeling process smoother, but because each machine needs to be intuitive and recognizable for the player. To do that, I'm sketching 3 variations for each machine. Then I'll pick one that I'll turn into a 3D model. For those of you who don't know, there are 9 machines in the game. 1 that generates the products, 4 that process them into different ones, 2 assemblers that will combine those into more complicated ones, a seller for you to sell those products, and of course, a conveyor belt to transport them. Some designs were inspired by real systems, like a mineralization tank for this processing machine. Others were built around some elements that I wanted to include, like these tanks filled with liquid for the generator, and sometimes I just drew shapes that felt interesting or close to the style I'm looking for. After sketching all of them, I ended up picking these designs, either because they fit the idea I had for the machine, or simply because of how cool they looked. I already picked the designs I liked, and I intentionally kept them low on detail. That's a limitation I'll need to stick to if I want the game to run well on most computers, even with potentially hundreds of machines on screen. I'll also need to tweak the designs where necessary to account for the input and output sizes so products can pass through properly. To make sure every machine fits perfectly in the game's grid, I made a 1x1 cube, exactly the size of a cell in the grid, and made a cut in it that matches the height of the conveyor belt. I'm using this as a guide for making every model. I also made a couple extra shapes to mark where the inputs and outputs should go, that way every machine can connect modularly. For some models, I followed the sketch closely and didn't make any major changes to the design, but that wasn't the case for all of them. Some were not interesting or recognizable enough once passed to 3D, so I had to add parts to make them work. In others, the proportions just didn't make sense, so I ended up tweaking the shapes and sizes on the designs. And in this one particularly, I didn't plan where the inputs and outputs would go, so I had to redesign it completely. I ended up changing way more than I expected once I passed the designs to 3D. Mostly to keep the models low on detail and make sure the inputs and outputs had the right sizes and lined up properly. The sketches were still helpful, and honestly, I think the constraints made the models come out even better. But better doesn't mean good. They look pretty bland because of a lack of detail and color. To fix that, I decided to go with texture painting. Basically, painting an image that will go wrapped around the model to give it detail. That way I can improve their look without adding extra geometry. I picked this method even though I've never done it before, so this is how it went. My first attempt was with Blender's built-in painting tools, but they were super imprecise and hard to work with, so I had to find another way. While looking for alternatives, I found a tutorial by Molten Bolt on how to link Blender to my image editing software, and that simplified my life a lot. So thanks Molten Bolt, if for some reason you're seeing this, pretty nice. Now all I have to do is paint the textures using a guide that shows the faces of the model, so it's pretty easy, but really time consuming. Anyway, I spent the day messing around with it to figure it out, and I made this. Not bad, but someone over on Discord said it looked like a toaster, and now I can't unsee it. So I changed the color palette and remade the texture with everything I've learned. With a clearer style in mind and a better understanding of the process, I went back and texture painted every machine. I even added arrows to show which way they're facing and figured out how to use material maps for metallic effects and light emission. Just adding textures completely changed the machines. It's wild how much more polished the models look now. I purposefully left the conveyor belts for last, not because they are less important, but because the process of making them is different from the rest of the models. They need to connect seamlessly, not just with each other, but also with every machine in the game. My first approach was pretty simple, just making a conveyor belt that connects correctly to the machines using the size guides I built earlier. From that shape, I created modular pieces that I can activate or deactivate in the game to open connection paths between machines and other conveyor belts. But then I noticed a much bigger problem. When machines are placed next to each other, they look completely clumped together. I have to do something about it because there's no breathing room and visually it just doesn't work. I considered making the grid cells bigger to give them space, but that would mean I would have to mess with my scripts and I really don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to scale the machine models down slightly. Visually, it will look the same and it's a lot simpler. But that leaves us with another problem. Now the machines don't fully cover the grid space, so they are no longer able to properly connect with the conveyor belts. A way to go around this is by making some conveyor belt extensions that connect to each side of the machines and conveyor belts. Just like the blockades, they can be activated or deactivated to open up connection paths. That way, everything can be linked up cleanly and modularly, so that's exactly what I did. Now the machines have room to breathe, which makes everything look so much cleaner. And I've made all the modular pieces needed for the conveyor belts to connect seamlessly. The design problems are finally over for now, but everything is still in Blender, so I have to get it into the game engine and make it actually work in the game. I exported each machine separately and brought them over to Unity with their textures and materials that I set up and paired together so they look like they should. Then I replaced the placeholder graphics on each machine with the corresponding new model and updated them across the rest of the systems. And just like that, the machines are finally integrated into the game. There's still a bit of tweaking left, mostly emissions and post-processing, but the models are in, and I gotta say, they look fire. But unfortunately, not everything is working as it should. Because even though you can place the conveyor belts, they still aren't connecting seamlessly, and that breaks the whole visual flow. So I have to write a script to fix that. First, I placed all the conveyor belt extensions and blockades in the right spots on the conveyor belt. I'll handle enabling and disabling them through the script. My first idea was to have conveyor belts connect automatically whenever there was something on an adjacent cell, but that doesn't always work, so instead I check where the other conveyor belt or machine is relative to this one, and then compare the directions they are facing. If they line up, I enable the extension and disable the blockade. I also added connection points to the machines that follow the exact same logic, so the whole system stays seamless no matter where you're placing things. It felt a little complicated at first, but actually it didn't take me that long to implement. And the result is super clean and really satisfying to watch. There's something I've been saving since I finished designing the machines. Some areas were left empty or had details in the sketches that didn't make it into the early 3D models. Well, I didn't forget about them, I'm adding them now. You see those gray tanks on the back of the generator? I'm stripping them out to replace them for what I originally envisioned. A clear glass tank with some liquid in it. I also added some foam that rotates inside it and some console locks on the side so it looks even better. I applied the same materials and details to the other machine that also contains water. For this one, I went with a simple solid color for the accents instead, and the final touch was updating the money icon on the seller to one that looks more fitting and polished. These additions slightly change the look of some machines and completely transform others. Either way, they are done now and the whole lineup finally feels complete. I've covered the full process on how I turned this dull prototype into something that actually looks like a game, but there's still a lot left to do. For example, the products are still just color boxes and they really don't match the style, so in the next video I'll tackle that. If you want to see how the game turns out and help support the game and devlogs, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications. That way you will be one of the first to see next update. Thank you for watching, bye bye.